Morning, everybody. It is 8:35. Welcome to the February 18th, 2021 meeting of the Personnel Oversight Committee on Appropriations. Delegate Young, Chair, I would like to apologize for my appearance. I got stuck behind de-icers on 97 and I walked into my office 5 minutes ago. That being said, prepared for the meeting, and so is the subcommittee. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to let June, we're going to go on HB 13 first to discuss that bill and its amendments. I'm going to let June go ahead and give a description and what the amendment does, while I also try and make sure one of our other members gets into the hearing. June, you have the mic. You're muted, June.
I said that was going to be the catchphrase of the session. Apologies. HB 13. The bill title is Influence on Collective Bargaining, Prohibition on Use of Public Funds, Income Tax Addition Modification. So amendment number 1 is technical, and amendment 2 strikes the income tax addition modification piece of the bill. So it basically removes the tax component of the bill. So what results is the amended bill prohibits a governmental unit from knowingly using funds to influence employees on making decisions related to collective bargaining. So basically just striking the tax component of the bill.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So June, as amended, is this seems really familiar. Is this now identical to a bill we passed out of the House a few years ago, or is this something different?
I do believe it's similar to a bill that Delegate Luckey had, the sponsor of the bill, had proposed. I would have to double check in terms of if it was passed by the House. I'm not sure in terms of that.
Okay, this seems very familiar. So I'm just trying to figure out if I understand we're not all going to maybe agree on it, but maybe we've already had this debate. So.
There was and I'll say that I know that there was a similar bill passed that didn't, wasn't as specific as this one, and I can get the specifics for you, Delegate. Also, the original bill that had the tax took this bill further than the previous one, but now that the tax piece is gone, it's just more specific from what I understand from the original bill that was passed a few years ago, but I'll get the date for you.
So, forgive me, sorry, was that prior bill law? Or that prior bill never became law, and this is a more specific version of that proposal?
I'll get the answer for you, Delegate. I thought we passed it, but I didn't know if it actually became law.
Okay, I mean, no, I can just look it up. Thank you.
That works.
She wanted to vacuum.
Delegate McKay, welcome. Delegate McKay, welcome.
Hello, sir.
Sure. Thank you. Delegate Kittleman, you have a question?
Well, is this the time to discuss the bill?
Yeah, I was gonna move the amendment and then we could get into discussion after we go to move the bill. But I was waiting for Delegate McKay, who's here now. But yeah, but I'll.
Mr. Chair, do you want a motion on the amendment? Move the amendment.
Yes, I do.
Move the amendment.
Second.
There's a motion and a second discussion on the amendment. And Delegate McKay, just for your information, this is HB 13. There's a motion and a second on the amendment that takes out the tax provision.
Thank you, sir.
And any other discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Seeing none, on the bill as amended, is there a motion?
Make a motion on the bill.
And a second?
Second.
Motion and a second discussion on the bill as amended. Delegate Kittleman?
As you might expect, I'm not particularly fond of this bill. Sorry, I lost my thought in the train of voting. I assume that the reason behind it is because there are some employees who want to have unions. I just was trying to isolate the purpose of the bill.
So the purpose of the bill is to prevent or ensure that public funds, taxpayer money, isn't used for the prevention of.
I was in my first life as a lawyer, I was a labor lawyer. And there's a very clear structure for the balance of power between labor and management. And I don't care that it's public money. Well, in fact, I do. I care that it's more important because it's public money to allow the people who run the administration of the department or the college to have the opportunity at least to talk to the people. The whole point of having unions, it's to put pressure on management because they're not treating them well. The pressure comes from the fact that businesses need to make money, and so they are incentivized to do what their employees ask, but they're incentivized also to make sure it's not too much. When you're doing it in public, they're spending taxpayers' money, and although most of the people are careful about that, it is not the same incentive. And to further tie the hands of the people who are negotiating against the union is, I just think it's not right for taxpayers. And I will tell you, in conjunction with the other bill that we are probably preparing to pass, I'm sorry, that's the same bill. I don't have it in front of me. I had a long conversation with the president of our community college. And we have community colleges now that are affordable and that are better colleges than, I think, Howard Community College, I think, is better than University of Maryland for teaching people things. Not only does the unionization, it will create more money, it will cost more money. And yes, there is a limit to what the college gets, but it changes. It also changes the dynamic between the management, quote unquote, and the teachers, most of which are extraordinarily happy, but it does change that dynamic. I just think overall, it's just the wrong way to go.
Gotcha. Thank you, Delegate Grice, then Delegate Corman.
Thank you. The Maryland Association of Community College, they had a list of like 11 amendments that they would want our committee to consider. Have any of you guys seen those amendments at all? And have we actually given it any serious consideration? Because once this bill passes, and if they do get that 30% vote, I can tell you that in certain areas on the shore, especially where with Chesapeake College, there's 5 county and county governments that are in their service area, and in work, I think it's like 3 or 4 counties that are there. And so when they start negotiating contracts, I mean, I don't know that this bill addresses any of that. I mean, once this thing's passed, I think there's going to be all sorts of problems that we haven't even talked about yet. And I don't think the bill addresses. And then amendments, I think some of those amendments actually do address some of those concerns. And there were.
I don't want to interrupt. I just want to make sure, because we have 2 bills. HB 13 is just the one from Delegate Lukey that addresses public funds going towards the paying for anti-union or preventing unions from organizing. There is only one amendment that takes out the tax provision. I just want to make sure we're talking.
I say, okay. So I was confused about another bill. So when that bill does come to our committee, I want to make sure that our subcommittee actually considers all those amendments. Okay. So I do. Thank you. I do appreciate it. I was confused with them.
No worries. And we are talking about HB 73. So while we're, when we go to vote, just if that is the one you want to talk about, I completely understand. I just want to make sure you do this one.
Okay. Sure.
Delegate Corman. And just so everyone else knows, this HB 13 does not, it doesn't allow for you. We already have the ability to collectively bargain. Public employees in Maryland have had it since the 1960s. This specifically states that public funds can't be used for the prevention of forming a union, just like we already have in statute that officials from the state and from public sector can't support the unionization of workers. This also prevents the use of public funds and the use of preventing unions. Delegate Corman.
Thank you. So first of all, not to debate the other bill, but since particularly my colleague from Howard County brought it up, Montgomery College is collectively bargains, and it's very highly rated, very successful, and actually the tuition is lower than many of the other community colleges that aren't collectively bargained. So I would just encourage my colleague to be careful about her painting with a broad brush. I don't mind if you advocate against the bill, but many colleges, or at least the one in my county, do collectively bargain, and that doesn't make them bad colleges. Nor is Howard County Community College bad because they don't collectively bargain. So I would just encourage you to be careful with how you
I was
refer
talking
to it.
about Howard County, so I will.
Yeah, I know, but you were contrasting it to other counties that might have collective bargaining at their community colleges, and Montgomery College already is collectively bargained. And
I take your point, but
we're doing just fine. So I appreciate your concern about our county. And Mr. Chairman, just on the bill, I think the purpose of this bill is to avoid having public entities hiring outside counsel, outside consultants to try to smack down on people who are trying to organize unions and hold elections under state and federal bargaining law. It seems like a very reasonable provision. The sponsor has made it cheaper for the state by removing the tax provision, and I think we should move the bill forward. I look forward to voting for it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good.
Is that a
And,
motion that needs to be seconded?
No, we already had the motion. We're in discussion. Delegate Rice, your hand. Is there another comment?
Oh, no, take it.
No worries.
I'll take it down.
No worries. All good. Just don't want to miss anybody. Delegate Kittleman, second bite of the apple, and then we'll go on. Go ahead.
I wanted to, what my friend from Montgomery County just said,
As long as it's on the bill.
reasonable, I'm trying to get there. Is the purpose to prevent them from hiring outside counsel? I think that's perfectly fine. But if you're talking about their salaries so that they can't say anything, that's a different story.
Good.
If I
Excellent.
could, an answer
And was there,
as to how it would be interpreted. And the way it sounds to me is that because they are being paid through public funds, it prevents any of the management, I hate to call it that, but from talking to their employees and doing the kinds of things that the federal labor law allows them to do. It is just to keep them from hiring outside counsel. You know, if that's the purpose, then I can go along with that.
I think that there are multiple comments made, but the main purpose is that public funds in any form will not be used for prevention, hiring, whether it's outside counsel, outside organizations where there is an absolute industry associated with preventing the unionization or potential collective bargaining of certain employees. This prevents public funds being spent for that purpose.
Can I ask, are we allowed to use names in our small committee?
Say again?
Are we allowed to identify people by name in our personnel committee?
I think we're just going to stick with the normal decorum if you can't just say your,
I will try.
and if they don't recognize it, then yeah, just mention.
I would like to know from my friend in Montgomery County how it's interpreted there.
Sorry, this bill is not the law in Montgomery County. What's the law in Montgomery County is that our community colleges can collectively bargain. I was responding to your and indirectly delegate, my friend from the Eastern Shores, comments about the broader collective bargaining issue. This, as far as I know, this provision does not exist locally in Montgomery County. I think it's a question for council about how it would be interpreted and what it's supposed to encompass. It's not my bill, it's the majority leader's bill.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was commenting on House Bill 894, which is not, we're not talking about that.
All right, Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For my friend from Howard County, I just wanted to point out on page 2, it does say this section does not apply to an activity performed or an expense incurred in connection with, and then there's a following list, and one of those says performing an activity required by federal or state law or a collective bargaining agreement. So I would assume, again, I don't want to put words in our council's mouth, but it seems to me like the situation you're describing is perfectly fine in the course of any collective bargaining. It seems like the scenario that you had suggested before is covered under, is an exception to the bill.
Thank you.
On the bill, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, and I will name Delegate Bites.
Opposed.
Okay, understood. Delegate Kittleman, Delegate Christ.
Correct.
6 in the affirmative, the bill passes. Thank you, folks. I'm just recording for my notes. Make sure we have everybody that recorded in the negative.
Me.
Yep, nope, I got.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, Delegate, I mentioned you first. I heard you say, but
Thank you, sir.
you're welcome. Moving on to HB 73, Telework. Purpose of, and if you remember, this is Delegate Grimm's bill. We heard recently This bill requires the judicial and legislative branches of state government to maintain a telework program that alters the statewide, excuse me, this was the pre-amended explanation. If you really remember from the hearing, this essentially mandates that there is a telework policy created for locals, state government, and for businesses that have more than 50 employees. This does not mandate that they implement or force employees to participate in telework program. It just mandates that there's a policy. So if they're currently teleworking or have folks that are teleworking, it just requires that we actually put that on the paper, or that they put that on the paper saying exactly what their policy is. There are two amendments. Amendment number one is technical. Amendment number two has multiple parts, and I'll go through them now and we can discuss. Amendment number two establishes the Office of Telework under the Department of Commerce to establish best practices for telework policies and to assist private sector businesses in implementing telework policy. Second part establishes a grant program to help small businesses with telework policies and sets up the structure of the program and mandates an appropriation of $1 million for the program. June, I believe that there was a amendment that also stated that it wasn't just for small businesses, it was for any business. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the correction that was made on the the edited reprint. So the program will be open to all businesses, regardless of the size of employees.
So please ignore small business, and the grant will be available to all businesses. Part three, beginning on October 1st, 2021, requires employers with more than 50 employees to implement and maintain a telework policy based on best practices established by the Office of Telework. Part four specifies that a public institution of higher education shall establish and adopt a telework policy and guidelines. Part five, on or after October 1st, 2023, authorizes that criteria for designated telework positions may be negotiated by employees who are represented already by an exclusive representative or bargaining unit. Those are the amendments. Present. Motion on the amendments.
Mr. Chairman, motion to move the amendments.
Is there a second?
Second.
On the amendment discussion, Delegate Christ.
Why are we passing this bill? I mean, what's I guess the problem? Or
Sure. So I think well, I mean, from the sponsor and from what folks have experienced over the last year is that telework has become a essential part of work. I think that we've done a great job, and generally the state's doing a good job working off of the hip, shooting from the hip, sure that we can keep people safe and allow for telework where previously folks wouldn't have been able to telework. This just makes sure and creates that now that we are in this position and while we're on our way out of it, that when we from the pandemic, that there is a policy in place associated with telework, so that if you've allowed telework over the last year, once it's over, there's a policy associated with that telework, so workers are protected, that there's a policy and a process for if somebody requests it. It really just, where before we didn't have to have a policy with telework, maybe there was something where you might be able to work remotely, but there wasn't a telework policy. This just makes sure that it's codified and that there's a process. So if something like this happens again, we don't have to then recreate the wheel. If you're already doing it, it just puts it on the paper and then folks know exactly what the policy is. Does that answer your question?
well, it does. Now, I guess my follow-up question is, why does it matter, especially at the local level? Why does it matter to us as state legislators that they have a policy? I mean, it's not really, for me personally, it doesn't matter to me how they run their business at the local level. I mean, the Charles County commissioners, honestly, it doesn't matter to me if they do or they don't. So why are we getting involved at the local level? My second question, or I guess my third question is, I asked it during the bill hearing if the sponsor had spoken to MML and MACO, and she said they didn't. And as far as I know, she hasn't since then, and neither has our subcommittee. And obviously, they're huge stakeholders in this, and I think we should certainly involve them. In fact, I know for certain that they do have amendments that they would like to offer as well.
Sure.
That we haven't even, again, we haven't listened to them, and I think it would be prudent if we do. So my suggestion would be if we could to delay the vote on this bill until we can actually talk about an amendment that they want to offer, because obviously they're huge stakeholders in this.
Sure. So I'll address your third question. I'll jump back to your second. So MML, they haven't reached out to me, and they don't have to, just as the chair of the subcommittee. They did submit testimony, and they had responded with what they wanted as one amendment that would strike a section of the bill that would, it would take away, I don't want to say the mandate, but it would take away some of the teeth just associated with.
Oh, it's a mandate. You can say it. That's what it is.
No. I mean, the bill's a mandate. I'm saying that the language they took out wasn't the mandate part. It was just taking them out. So, I mean, there still would have been a mandate. It just would have taken out this local piece. So we did look at the amendment. We just felt that at the end of the day, and I was telling somebody else earlier, this bill's very flexible. It's also one of the bills that states a lot of things, but it says after it's all said and done, to the extent practicable, which means that if you're already at the local level, and folks, and I'm just for an example, if you have an office that has 10 employees, but only 2 of them can realistically can telework, then the policy only associates to 2 people, and your policy that you create can just apply to those 2 folks, because it's up to the organization, the business, or how you're already doing it. We're not being prescriptive here in terms of what they have to do. If the locals where you're at already have don't have a telework policy, but already are allowing folks to telework, they already have the structure. All they have to do is put it on paper and say that this is what the telework policy is. And I know it is a mandate because it's requesting to do it, but we're not asking them to do anything else. And by creating the Office of Telework, the purpose is to also provide assistance for folks that are having trouble or need assistance or guidance associated with what the telework policy would look like. So, but that was to address the second part. I didn't say we worked with MML, but they did reach out. We entertained the amendments or talked about them. We just felt that it wasn't necessary because they had the flexibility associated with the language of the bill.
I'm still confused. It's not overly prescriptive. They can have something even written on a napkin that says, hey, you know what, here's our policy. I just don't understand the purpose in doing this.
Sure. So
again, I don't understand. What I don't understand is, as a state legislature, why does it matter to us if they have a policy or not?
Sure. So
the message we're sending them is that we know better how to run their business than they do. You know,
that goes to your second question. So I wanted to make sure that I addressed, but just in terms of talking with MML and MACO, they had reached out, not to me directly, but about the amendment. I can't speak for the sponsor, but I know that the committee has discussed with them. So I just want to make sure you know that we had engaged with them and asked about what they were trying to accomplish by their amendment, which we felt was covered by the language. They probably don't agree, but we felt it was covered. To the second question, why would we get involved? I would say that, I mean, part of the concern now that we have been, I mentioned earlier, I think we've done a good job of taking considerations of the health concerns and allowing people to telework where they can. I think even DVM had mentioned how they went from 10, 20%, 10 or 15% teleworking folks before the pandemic to now 85%. We're doing a good job of allowing this, but there's nothing on paper associated with what a policy is. So now what we have is workers at the state level, at the local level, at the private level that are now, I would argue, not as protected as if they were in the workplace. They're allowed to work. They're doing the work that they can from their home. But if they were in an office, there would be protections associated with it because there's certain policies associated with their work. There's no policy. Well, I won't speak for everybody. It's a blanket statement. If a private business already has a policy associated with telework, then they already, by the time when the bill passes, then they've already met the requirements. If there's a business that just is allowing their folks to telework but doesn't have a policy associated with it's official, then I would say the state should be concerned because we're susceptible to lawsuit, and not applying to private businesses, but there's just protections for workers and protections for the state when there's a policy in place. And I think, Delegate Rice, you know from working in local government that, and I would make sure that you understand too that writing on paper on a napkin, is not what we're trying to accomplish here. And I'm trying to show how flexible that the bill is, but it wouldn't be that facetious to just do it like that. But it's important to have something on paper associated with the policy and the procedures of your employees. And I think that's why we should care as a state. There are plenty of other issues that as a state that we get involved with. I don't think that this is, and I think that's also why it was written this way, to not be prescriptive. We're not saying that you have to provide X, provide Y. We're allowing the organization to choose for themselves because it says to the extent practicable for them to decide what the policy looks like. If they think what they're doing now is acceptable, that's the policy. And they're in compliance, and they don't even need to engage with the grant or with the office. But that's my explanation or answer to your question. I just want to throw it back to you so I can get some other folks to talk.
Okay, and then the MML amendment, actually, from what I understand, didn't exclude local government, from what I understand. So, I mean, we can run this through today. But once we get this amendment from MML, so that way all of us have a real clear understanding of what they're trying to accomplish. I think we should give it some serious consideration in committee, if we could do that.
Understood. And I can bring those concerns up to the folks before full committee as well. Delegate Corman, then Delegate Beitzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, I'll just say, I think entertaining the local amendments, even if we don't ultimately adopt them, is totally reasonable. To my friend from the Eastern Shore's point, I haven't personally seen them, so there could be some merit. I have no idea. I will say, just sort of on the broader bill, my recollection is we actually included some money in the bipartisan bi-branch relief act for incentivizing telework. So the Maryland General Assembly in this young session already has a track record of supporting telework. And I think the reason we care, to my friend from the Eastern Shore, is we've actually found, and maybe this isn't an issue over in your neck of the woods, but there's a lot of traffic benefits from encouraging telework. There's also an impact on transit. So just to save you the trouble there, if people are working from home, if they're able to do that, if their jobs allow it, there's a huge benefit on traffic. We basically don't have volume-based congestion right now around the Beltway and I-270 in my neck of the woods. We don't have it for a bad reason, which is people are stuck at home because of a pandemic and not able to go to work. But if we can learn something from that if people don't have to drive every morning between 8 and 9 and every evening between 5 and 6, that can have big benefits in terms of where we're spending our dollars. Maybe we'll have more money for highway user revenue for the Eastern Shore and Western Maryland if we don't have to spend so much filling potholes on the Beltway. So I think there's a lot of merit to the bill. Totally take your point about seeing if local government concerns can be addressed. But I do think there is a policy benefit that we should care about. That's not just, we want to, say telework is good. There's some actual, I think, tangible benefits for the state and state policy. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Beitzel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had some questions and comments, but because of, this is our first meeting and with the Zoom thing, and you can't switch back and forth to get the information that you want to look at, I'd like to also support my Eastern Shore delegate in asking that we hold this over so we can get these amendments, look at it closer, and be in a better position to decide on this bill.
Yeah, and just to confirm to Delegate Grice, were you requesting that we hold this until later in the day? That's what you were requesting, or were you requesting that we address other amendments or make sure we look at it, consider consistently with the full committee?
Either way, as long as before we pass this out of committee, that we have an opportunity to, if they're good amendments and we have the opportunity to amend it. I mean, it doesn't have to be done in subcommittee. We can do it in full committee. It's up to you, Mr. Chairman.
Gotcha. Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Beitzel, just wanted to make, was there any other comment?
I was going to comment, and I, with my colleague from Montgomery County, I agree and concur with some of these things. It's especially government entities where you want to encourage teleworking if it's there. But I really object to the provision of putting private industry in this, private businesses into this. Was in business 30 some years, and it's hard enough to run a business. And in the 30 years I was in business, there was just a continuous, every year, something more added on and more added on, and things end up telling you how to run your business and what you could do and you can't do. And so I have a question is, if private business doesn't do this, I don't see any enforcement provisions in the bill. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to them, and who's going to do it, and what's the penalty?
Sure. And I want to go back and just make sure, June, from pages of the reprint, it's pages 3 and 4 that describes what the Office of Telework does, correct?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
The Office of Telework, it's basically establishing best practices for the telework policy. And also Delegate vital just to remind you that there is the grant program, which establishes $1 million for all businesses to apply to get help and assistance and aid for teleworking.
And Delegate, I know your question was about enforcement, and I think that, you know, this is one of those things where you're right. If you'd like to, I know you already don't like the amendment associated with including private businesses, but if you'd like there to be some enforcement, we're happy to entertain some ideas about that. But at this moment, I think the general feeling, especially for this, is to the establishment first, and there really aren't provisions associated with penalizing folks. It's the encouragement of a telework policy that doesn't exist. I don't think the intent of the bill was to penalize, but I think there'll be discussions associated with that afterwards. So I don't think anybody wants to penalize anybody for not having it, but we want there to be something and encourage the creation of telework policies that don't already exist. Does that answer your question? Your question is that there isn't really.
Clearly, by passing the bill, it's the intent of the General Assembly to make sure this happens. So it's like the inchworm. You get a little bit at a time. So it's like death by 1,000 cuts. So if these businesses don't come into conformity and that they don't do it and we aren't satisfied that they're doing it, then there'll be another bill coming out saying you got to do it. And if you don't do it, this is what's going to happen. And it's just more and more regulations and burdens put on private businesses, and especially with what's going on right now. I mean, look how many of them shut down, forced to shut down. And I think we ought to leave them alone for a while so they get back so they can get their businesses back and up and operating before we dump something else on them. That's just my comments. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I sort of, unlike my colleagues, when I first saw this bill, I thought it was fantastic. I think telework is something that is a real benefit to very many people. But my question is, here we have the pandemic and telework suddenly becomes popular and everyone is involved in doing it. And we found the value in it. Why on earth do we have to, as a government, then put in a mandate to spend a lot of money and force people or require people to do something that they're already willing to do voluntarily?
I think you didn't exactly answer the question, but part of my answer would be that you're right, since folks are already doing this, the purpose being that it's codifying actual practice of telework due to the pandemic. And, you know, I think we're going to have there will probably be books written about what it was like prior to the pandemic. I know that if I tried to have a meeting over Zoom last December of 2019, I would have been acting like I wasn't taking it seriously. Now everything's over Zoom, everything's virtual, because that's the nature of how this has kind of shaped how work goes. I think that even prior to this, I was in higher ed and tried to telework when my son was born, and had to go through 5 different steps and processes to be allowed to, and then I ended up being denied for it, and then found out there was no real telework policy in the first place. So I think that's part of this, where you're right, this has forced folks into the virtual workspace. I don't imagine it's going to stay like this. I would rather see everybody in person. We'd have everything in front of us, and we're all still in work with it. I think that at the end of the day, that this one recognizes that folks are already doing this and puts it on paper to then allow for there to be a clear process for someone to use it, or to then have it implemented in the future if something negative were to happen, or just making sure people stay healthy. When somebody's sick, should they be allowed to telework? I think most people would say yes now, where before be like, I'm not sure how we would do that. But that's just my opinion and a comment to your statement too. But go ahead.
One thing that does, I need to say, and particularly on appropriations, is that I agree with everything you said. The only thing I will have to vote against this bill because it has a mandate of $1 million. It's not our money to spend. It comes from the taxpayer. So it seems to me that we really should have a real important, clear need to spend money before we do it.
Sure, and I can respect that. And I would say I think that since it's $1 million of taxpayer money that we would then be giving back to the taxpayer, because it's all supposed to be for grant purposes. for me, again, I understand why it may not be enough for you, but that's just my thought process for the $1 million that we're allocating towards the grant. Delegate McKay, I believe you have a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had quite a lot of advocates call me about this bill and tell me why they thought it was good. While I didn't do an official tally, only about 20, maybe 25% were telling me that the customer service that they were providing to the residents of the state of Maryland were better because of telework. I think it's actually higher than that, but their conversations with me really were, well, my son's in school and I can actually work with my son in school and still get my work done. Or I can take my mother to the doctor. I'm a single child and I have to take my aging mother to the doctor. While I think this bill may have some relevancy in the future, I'm concerned that we're rushing to adopt a telework policy when we don't have data showing has it been positive or has it not been positive when it comes to productivity. I don't think anybody's out there trying to use or abuse, but when we adopt a policy of officially accepting telework, it opens up the Pandora's box, such as where it talks on page 3, line 13, the definition of telework, and it's using the employee's home. Well, if you're using the employee's home, are we going to then be extending insurance issues with it? There's a variety of questions. I just think that while I think the intent was good by the sponsor, I just don't think this is the time we should be deciding to do this at this point. And it's just more of a commentary, but I thank you for the opportunity.
Sure, and I appreciate the comments, and I know that we have diverse constituencies. I do want to also make sure to point out that we're not forcing anyone to telework. This bill does not, one, require private, public, locals, anyone to require their employees to telework. And I think that especially all of us here, going from a world where we meet in person and know the importance and the nuance associated with meeting in person, now having to do this virtually, I don't think we want to do this permanently. I think that the hope is, and the fear would be that after going through all of this, there are things that have worked and things that haven't, and that we take what we've learned and apply it to post-pandemic, and that by creating a policy, you ensure that there is at least tools and best practices that you've already learned, or that you as in an organization has already learned, to then put into practice and then use post-pandemic to protect workers, to protect the workplace and protect the employer, legally, healthily, and just, I think, generally. So I just want to make sure that, one, I appreciate the concerns and the comments, but just as folks know, we're not forcing anyone into taking an action. This is only mandating that there is a policy associated with an action to be taken, which would be, I apologize, which would be a telework policy, whether it's already being conducted or not. So that I would just comments in response to, but I appreciate the perspective. Delegate Corman, I know your hand has been up. I didn't know if it was from earlier, if you had another comment, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on the bill, I mean, this bill does not invent telework. So questions about insurance or taxes, those already sort of apply in the world. Telework is not new. Actually, if you look at Maryland, it's been much more prominent in the DC suburbs than in Baltimore, and that's partly the job mix. But there's almost, I think it's something between 10 and 14% of workers in the DC region already have telework as part of their daily lives pre-pandemic. So this is not, creating a new category of work that opens up a Pandora's box of some of the interesting questions that my friend from Western Maryland raised. To my other friend from Western Maryland, I just want to note the bill applies to employees that are basically 51 or more. So on the medium to larger size. It does have the grant program to try to help them if they need it, but it's frankly going to apply to a lot of businesses that already have a telework policy anyway. I think the telework policy for some businesses is going to be, we can't telework. If you work in the dry cleaning business, unless you're in the back office, you're not teleworking. That's not a job that allows you to telework. If you're working in a restaurant, unless you're, maybe on the sort of purchasing side, you're not going to be teleworking. So for them, the telework policy is, we can't telework. That's not our job. And the Office of Telework can sort of help people find those categorical definitions. And I just, back to my other friend again from Western Maryland, we actually do have data on the productivity. They've been collecting data on this for about a year. And frankly, to a lot of people's surprise, and I think a lot of it is because of technology, productivity is actually done pretty well. And in fact, improved for a lot of people. That may be because they don't have to take off a whole day if they need to drive mom to the doctor. They can still work 7 hours of the day. Zoom helps. That's a big part of it. Unlimited minutes on your cell phone helps. That's a big part of it. For those who have access to those things, which not everybody does, which is why the grant program and the Office of Telework can be helpful. Montgomery County used some of its early CARES Act dollars on a telework program that helped small businesses make the transition. That's been pretty successful. I think this is partly maybe modeled off of that. So I think this is a good bill, accepting that we might want to consider some other amendments, as my friend from the Eastern Shore suggested, full committee. I think we should move through the subcommittee process today.
Appreciate Delegate also pointing out the flexibility of the bill as amended. Delegate Christ.
Yeah, just real quick. I still don't understand the point in doing this. If somebody can basically say, hey, you know what, we choose not to telework. Well, that's our policy. Why is it even necessary that we're mandating that they have a policy that says that they choose not to telework? I mean, who's going to use that information? Is the state going to use it? And how are we going to use it? Because obviously we're creating this mandate that they have to have a policy, but we're going to give them the flexibility to go from like not teleworking at all, even if they could, all the way up to, obviously, very complex telemarketing strategies that they might have. I just don't see the point in doing this.
Sure. And I think, with all of our bills and pieces of legislation that deal with whether it's business or something else, we want 100% participation. I think when, unfortunately, then at this level, we get the statistics and numbers. I think that to Delegate Beitzel's point, there isn't a punitive action here. There isn't a specific piece that talks about what to do if someone doesn't comply with the policy, because the purpose, well, multiple purposes. One is to encourage the creation of the policy. And while I'd like 100% participation, I know that we're not going to get it. But to your point about why even do it then, I think it's to make sure that post-pandemic, and even now, where there's a nebulous area of folks working remotely and also being employed, or folks that are participating in an ad hoc telework, not policy, but just teleworking because they've been allowed to, and then not knowing or having uncertainty associated with the pandemic, or even that transition from things are getting much better to, but still there's concern associated with health. If there's a policy in place now, even if it is just the initial one that we've mandated, that they've already been doing, then that allows for that question to be answered when folks are still concerned about going back to work. And if the employer is willing to work with employees, I think, I don't mean to belabor, but I think it goes back to the employer having tools, employees having tools, and being able to protect the workplace, the employer and the employee. But go ahead.
Is there a reporting requirement in this?
Yes, but sorry, there was June. What was the decision made on the reporting requirement?
There's no reporting requirement.
There is no reporting requirement. Sorry.
So there's really no way to enforce this then.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. There is a reporting requirement. It's just that each unit of state government would report to B&T and appropriations with the number of eligible employees that are participating.
So the reporting requirement only affects state government agencies and not local. Okay, so from a local perspective, there really is no enforcement mechanism.
Not at this time and not in this bill, no.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Delegate Corbin, hand was still up. Other comment or question? No. With that, Delegate Greist, I agree with, I think this conversation is been robust, and I think some other members from the full committee would also like to participate. I'm actually willing to work with all members that would like to, one, discuss the amendments they may not have had time to review, and discuss any additions for a full committee. But if we can, we'll move it through the subcommittee and we'll bring it to the full committee for another discussion.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, there was a first and a second on the amendments. On the amendments, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, and I will, yep, Delegate Kittleman, Delegate McKay.
Or we're voting on the amendment, or is this the bill?
On the amendment, amendments, yeah,
Well, I'm
So I
fine
only
with the
have
amendments.
got it. So I have Delegate McKay and Delegate Kittleman, nay on the amendments. Anyone else? Okay, the amendments pass. On the bill as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Delegate McKay, Delegate Kittleman, Delegate Grice, and Delegate Beitzel. All right, folks, that ends the work that we have for the subcommittee. I appreciate the discussion and the candor and the timing. Delegate Valentino Smith had suggested donuts. If I hadn't gotten stuck behind ice machines, I was actually going to buy them and have them in my office for you. Maybe next time though. So thank you, everybody. Motion to adjourn. Thank you.
So moved.